Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a bit of a showdown for you. We're going to be squaring off the tier 10 French medium tank, well should I say the auto-loading tier 10 French medium tank, the BatChat 25T, against the relatively new tier 10 French light tank, the AMX 13105. Now, a lot of you will remember many months ago when the tier 10 light tanks went into the game that I put out a video where I said that they were useless. And I have to admit, maybe I picked the wrong word, because a tank isn't really useless. You could put an M3 Lee up at tier 10 and sometimes you're going to have something really lightly armored just sit in front of it and it's still going to be efficient, right? So maybe I should have said competitive. I think competitive would be the word that I was trying to get out there. Now, of course, Wargaming recently have changed it so that the tier 10 light tanks have that full alpha damage of the tier 10 medium tank. So the 13105 has a 3-round 105mm with 390 alpha, whereas the BatChat, the tier 10 medium tank, has a 5-round 105mm autoloader. Now that is a lot of damage, right? We're talking about 1,950 damage if you manage to connect an entire magazine, and so that's why within the first minute of this game, just over a minute of this game, we've picked up 1,832 damage, killed a tank, and also managed to do some spotting on a different vehicle. And that's just something that the 13105 wouldn't be able to do in that scenario. If I'd gone in there, I might not have been able to kill the T49. Well, actually, I certainly wouldn't have been able to kill the T49 unless I ammo-racked him or I set him on fire. And so then I would have been left with a really awkward moment where I failed to assassinate a vehicle, and then I either have to run away or I guess I just have to get lucky and try and avoid him until my next reload is up. Now, one thing I'd just like to highlight here is that, did you notice how I repaired my fuel tanks? And look how important that is, because my fuel tanks got damaged again with the second shot. A lot of people wonder why I don't take fire extinguishers in many of my vehicles, and that's because there are two ways to be set on fire in World of Tanks. One is if your fuel tanks go red. If your fuel tanks go red, then they go back to being yellow, but your vehicle is on fire. And the other way is if your engine is hit, you've got a percentage chance of being set on fire, but in some vehicles it's as low as 10%, and other vehicles it's as high as 20%, so you take your chances, right? Now, because I repaired my fuel tanks there, that means that they weren't damaged to a point where they went red, and so a fire never occurred. And now that repair kits are reusable, I really do feel that if you're quick on the trigger finger and you can repair even in between taking hits. I even went as far as to rebind my fuel tanks to a mouse key, well, a mouse button on the side of my mouse here. So I press 4 and then I press my mouse button really quickly so it doesn't stop me from having to take my hands off the WASD and press my 8 key, which is very awkward to try and repair your fuel tanks, right? So that's a little tip there. Look, it's not a cheap way to play World of Tanks, but when you've got to the stage where I am, where you're not really having to buy multiple tanks every single day, and there's only 1 or 2 tank lines left in the game that you're slowly making your way through, then you can afford to invest your extra credits into things like the premium consumables, and they do provide an edge in a tank that is flexible like the BatChat. I believe my view range in this vehicle, when I'm using coated optics, vents, and the like, starts to go up to about 500 meters. So the key differences, let's get back to talking about the BatChat versus the 13105. So what I'm doing here is, you might notice just how much more accurate this tank is than the 13105. I get incredibly frustrated when I'm playing my tier 10 light tanks, because it just feels like while their aim time is great and their gun handling, a lot of them are phenomenal, the accuracy is just absolutely abysmal. The 13105 has exactly, how much accuracy does it have? It has 0.42, whereas the BatChat 25T has 0.38, and that's a real big difference. Even 0.38 is not great, right guys? I'm not saying 0.38 is fantastic, but at least it's not terrible like 0.42. So that means that when you fully aim between your shots, and these two tanks have the same unload speed of 2.73 seconds, I believe it is, the intra-clip reload, yes it is exactly, then this vehicle's just going to be able to hit more of its magazine. And when you've got an autoloader, quite often every shot counts. But when you've got extra shells in the magazine like the BatChat, it doesn't feel like the end of the world sometimes if you miss a shot, and you don't feel like you're depending on rolling high to be able to finish off the vehicle as much. And that's something that hopefully I'll be able to highlight in my subsequent gameplay when I play the 13105. And that bounce, it's annoying, but who cares, because I got another shell to finish him off. However, one thing that is slightly annoying about the BatChat 12T is it doesn't carry much ammunition, 30 rounds, whereas I believe the 13105 carries 33 rounds, which is actually a nice little perk for that vehicle. And towards the end of the game, when you've had a real good one, or maybe when you've just been really unlucky and missed a few shells, you do start to run out of ammunition. And I only take one heat magazine in this vehicle because I feel that if I'm having a one-on-one against some super heavily armored German heavy tank or tank destroyer, or even something like a Type 5 heavy, right? Having that heat, or even an IS-7, there's lots and lots of vehicles these days that you are more competitive if you fire heat rounds against, right? Then having that magazine just provides you with a little bit of flexibility. But it's also quite annoying if you load that heat magazine and then you only fire off 1 or 2 shells, it's going to be immensely awkward. But, you know, the heat penetration in this tank just significantly better than in the 13105. In the 13105, you have 280 millimeters of heat pen. In this vehicle, I believe it's either 330 or 340. It's 330. It's only the larger caliber guns at tier 10 that have that 340 heat pen. So I decide to repair my fuel tank again, just in case this T-49 hits me with his 90mm gun and ignites my tank, and that won't allow me to be able to get this Jagdpanzer 100. I'm just hoping my team stops capping. Took me a while to get behind this vehicle, and that means that we're only going to be able to get 2 shots off before the game ends. Oh, disaster. That's exactly where you want to be. A tier 10 autoloader with a full magazine behind a tank that has absolutely no chance of turning around to engage you. Oh, it's frustrating, and that's really where the BatChat shines. No, not being frustrating. You know, all tanks can be frustrating in World of Tanks, but just getting into that assassination position where you can really just take out an entire vehicle. But when you're packing all of that extra shell velocity, something that I failed to mention in that absolute blitz of a game in the BatChat, the fact that the BatChat has 1,460 meters a second shell velocity, whereas this vehicle's closer to 1,000, you really do have to give a lot more lead when you're playing your tier 10 light tanks. Now, there's one thing that I'd like to highlight, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned this on YouTube. I've mentioned this quite a few times on Twitch, and that is that for some reason, tier 10 light tanks get absolutely abysmal shell drop-off over long range. You lose pretty much 25% of your penetration at a distance of 500 meters, when vehicles like tier 10 medium tanks and some tank destroyers are only losing about 5 or 10%. And you might think, well, is that a case for all light tanks? But that's not the case either. Tier 9 light tanks are only losing about 10% of their penetration over long distances. It just seems like Wargaming really wanted to try and do everything they possibly could to make it so that tier 10 light tanks were not competitive, I'd say, in a combat sense against mediums. And I can understand that because, of course, they have other advantages, right? Look how small the AMX 13105 is compared to the BatChat. I guess it kind of sucks that this vehicle can't bounce many shells, whereas the BatChat has really funky angles, and when it's moving along, quite often you don't get overmatched because it's got 40mm of side armor, and some on the front is 60, whereas this vehicle, its armor is abysmal, and even 105mm caliber guns are going to be overmatching it absolutely everywhere. And that just really annoys me when I'm playing my light tank, because I feel like I have to take so many more premium rounds in this vehicle, because even its standard rounds have 25mm less penetration. And we're talking about the penetration dropping to about 190 at 500 meters, whereas the BatChat's probably still got about 240 millimeters. I'd say the BatChat's probably got more penetration at 500 meters than this vehicle does when it's firing at point blank. Now, that wouldn't be surprising, considering I guess it's a full-blood medium, right? Rather than it being a tier 10 light. But I guess that the key issue for me is that since Wargaming have, should we say, made the artillery a support class in World of Tanks, and I feel that they're just doing less damage now, but I guess they're stunning. Stunning is great if you have the combat capacity, like you're a medium tank or a heavy tank, to be able to then swoop in on something and take advantage of the fact that it's incapacitated. Or I guess mediums and lights also can take advantage when tanks are stunned because they'll have poor view range, and that's what I tried to do to the Scorpion at the start of the game. It just feels that spotting in World of Tanks now feels so much less rewarding unless you're on a map like Prokhorovka and Malinovka, and really the people you're spotting for are tanks rather than the self-propelled guns. So what advantages does the 13105 have compared to the BatChat? Well, obviously, having a smaller magazine, while the DPM on this tank is about 10% less, it will be able to reload quicker. The BatChat takes 40 seconds to reload a magazine, whereas this takes 27. But of course, then you only have 3 shells rather than 5. But one thing that's lovely about this vehicle, and I really like the tier 10, even above maybe the AMX 1390, is that this tank has 8 degrees of gun depression. And so that means that if you get above your opponents, like this bizarre situation here where I'm just trying to bait these tier 9 German tank destroyers into shooting me. Oh no, Ferdinand comes around the corner, we got to shut him down before he gets us. Aiming at the weak point on the side of his vehicle, easily able to go through. Now we come round, will we be able to find another shot into the WTR Panzer IV? Yes, we will. Good stuff there. So that 8 degrees of gun depression, better than the BatChat 6. Plus this vehicle has superior aim time and gun handling, and I decide to try and bunny hop onto the WTR Panzer IV, but it goes to be an absolute disaster. Now why did I do that? Well, I did that even when I was reloading because I really felt responsible for this IS-3. I thought that if I can distract these 2 WTR Panzer IVs, there you go, the IS-3 actually saves me a little bit there as he manages to shut down the WTR. Oh, wait a minute, was it me? Did I shut down the WTR Panzer IV? Well, I know I shut down the second one. Oh man, I got lost within myself there. Let's go back 20 seconds to see exactly what happened, because I thought the IS-3 saved me, but maybe he didn't. Okay, I'm just managing to reload. Maybe this is a case where the AMX 13105 is better than the BatChat because I don't quite have that long reload. Oh yes, it was the IS-3 who saved me. Oh, this is a real feels-good moment. The fact that I dive around the corner, distract the WTs who would have clearly just annihilated that tier 8. And you can see I stop for a moment. I'm probably giggling to myself, looking for that. Those are my favorite moments in World of Tanks, where you do something maybe a little bit silly or something arguably a little bit courageous, I guess, to try and help the IS-3 out. And then it all comes together and you manage to have success. And oh dear, T-28 prototype. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Oh, he chokes. Rip, son. Even an experienced player like this on the T-28 prototype, it is quite a hard tank to hit, I guess. And when you do have that engine power, I guess, maybe an advantage for the 13105, considering it goes at 68 rather than the 65 top speed limit of the BatChat, and its traverse speed is actually a little bit better because of that crazy engine power, even though the BatChat, funnily enough, has better traverse speed because, well, the track traverse, I should say, because the 13105 just has that amazing torque or the engine power, then it actually manages to turn a little bit quicker, which is really nice. So we're just bombing it around here, going absolutely crazy. Although, I don't know, maybe this feels really good because it's a tier 10 light tank, but I'd probably be a little bit disappointed in myself if I was playing a BatChat. I think I'd done this amount of damage in the first 2 minutes of the game playing the BatChat, whereas with the AMX 13105, it really feels like we had to work for it. And so that really brings me back to my point. Is the 13105 so much better at being a scout tank that it's worth giving up the combat capacity? And that really is the question that you should ask when you're looking at which of these two vehicles do you want to play. And funnily enough, this tank has got worse view range. It's got 390 rather than 400 in the BatChat, so that's an immediate disadvantage for the vehicle. Secondly, its camera rating is pretty much the same when it's stationary, but when it's moving, it is 10% better. Now, of course, that's useful to have 10% better camera rating when you're moving. It allowed me, for example, to get into that bush location at the start of the game to be able to take on that Scorpion G, and who knows what else I could have spotted. But is it worth giving it all up for? I really feel that the light tanks deserve to maybe have just a little bit more view range than the mediums, or their camera rating needs to be better, or maybe it's just that the BatChat's camera rating is just too darn good. Now, I guess I could have saved the shot there to be able to steal the kill, but I'm not really too interested in that. I'd rather put the extra shot into the T92, but maybe that was a little bit risky because he did spot me, and you don't want, I guess, still the biggest gun in the game bearing down upon you when you're in such a lightly armored tank. So our first round in the BatChat was a high caliber for 7,092 damage. How long did this game even go on for? 6 minutes and 20 seconds. Not too bad. It's just a shame that we capped out, although it's the right thing to do to secure the game, right? I don't think I can be too begrudging about the KV4 and the Carnarvon who decided to get a few cap points. Otherwise we would have picked up a Radley Walters and probably 8k in less than 7 minutes. While next up in the AMX 13105, we managed to do a little bit of assistance for the team, 1,827 as well as 4,700 damage ourselves. That's a high caliber. Only a top gun here. Didn't quite have the magazine or the DPM to be able to secure more kills, but a big shout out to MKM. In his IS-3, it's always nice to have a little bit of candid teamwork there to take on those two sneaky German tank destroyers. And yeah, profit in this game. Did we make profit in the BatChat? Yeah, 50k. 2 decent rounds at tier 10, although I would say that the enemy tanks that we were shooting at were rather lightly armored this game, and so we didn't have to fire lots of premium ammunition and there weren't too many ricochets. So all in all, if I could only have one of these 2 top tier French vehicles, which would it be and why? Well, for me, it's got to be the BatChat 25T. I feel that this thing does 90% of the scouting job that the AMX 13105 can do, but I feel that its combat capacity is probably at least 25% better. And when you combine this with armor that can actually ricochet something and a good old slug of hit points, 1,800 compared to the 1,400 that the 13105 has, then it just feels the all-round better vehicle. However, if we were to go back a year or two, of course, tier 10 light tanks weren't available then, before the artillery changes. I guess they're neither nerfs or buffs, but there's no doubt that overall their personal damage was reduced, but the amount of support they deal has been increased. But of course, when you're a light tank and you're depending on those artillery to put in those armor-piercing shells or just eliminate something's hit points by half when you make that spot, there's no doubt that affected the viability of the light tanks in the game. And really, unless I think that you get on something like Prokhorovka or Malinovka, where you can really try to push for some aggressive bush locations, I'd still rather be in the BatChat 25T. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, or maybe it was just useful for you. If it was, give it a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it, and let me know in the comments whether you agree with my analysis on the differences between the BatChat 25T and the AMX 13105, or is it the other way around? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.